Always fidgeting with stuff. Never right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ryan Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? On today's video, I wanted to go over kind of an odd subject, but something worthwhile touching on. I wanted to talk about ride modes, so let's get into it.
Now get ready. Here we go.
Man, that's a cow lick that won't go away. Anyways, all right, ride modes. What are they? Well, let's see. These are the modes that we put rides in. This is going to be a short video if I keep this up like this. Okay, so when you work on a ride or when you operate a ride, the ride has multiple modes to it. I know we all think of things like a Scooby-Doo cartoon where we come there and the roller coaster, just one main switch, we turn it on and it runs, right? Well, not actually that way. There's actually a lot of complicated startup and shutdown procedures to them. I've actually made other videos about those, putting rides to bed, starting rides up, that sort of stuff. But on this one, I want to talk about specifically what modes we use to put the rides in, to what state they have to be in to operate. So most of you can probably guess what the modes are. There's pretty much automatic and manual. There's other modes in between them I will go into. But you have to understand that the higher you get up in the mode structure, automatic being pretty much the lowest, but the higher you get up in the manual functions, the less safety there is in the program. So that's one of the reasons why you need special keys to operate the rides in manual or bypassed type mode, is because you're actually going through and bypassing a lot of the programming that the ride is meant to make sure it keeps its train safe and keep people out of areas where they're not supposed to be. So the higher up in the mode, when you go from automatic to manual, it starts ignoring some of that stuff. So let's start at the very beginning. We're going to start with saying, if you haven't been here before, make sure you like and subscribe, and let me know what you think about the video. I'm always up for comments, like to hear what people's thoughts are, and let me know if you want to see something in the future, the topic that you might want to see. All right, so let's get into the startup mode. So when you come to a ride, it's off. First thing we do is we put the key in, turn the key switch, and we're going to turn the ride on. Maybe this is one of those times like, hey, how do you turn your ride on? You start talking really soft to it, maybe rubbing it on the side a little bit, saying, what are you doing later, huh? Maybe give it the old, how you doing? No, not like that. Take a key switch, right? Take our maintenance key or an operations key, depending on how the ride's set up. Put it in there. There you go. The ride's on now. But is anything going to operate? No, nothing's going to operate at that point. You have to go through the startup procedure. So what's a startup procedure designed to do? Well, the ride in startup mode is just designed to do that exact thing. It's designed to start things around the ride. What needs to be started? Sometimes on rides they have things like peripheral air compressors that need to be started. You can do that from the panel a lot of times. Just so go up, simply hit air compressor on, and the air compressor will start. Now, while the ride is in its startup mode, it is ignoring a lot of stuff around the track, because one of the things that has to be started is something like a processor. This is a processor. Pretty cheap one. But one of the things that it has to do is it has to start up as well. So while the ride is powering up and starting up, it's checking sensors all over the track. Well, if the power is not started in the right sequence, the sensors will read false things and you get ghost trains around. So you don't want to do that. So a lot of the ride has a startup procedure built in order to turn things on in the correct sequence. Typically, there's not a lot of interaction needed from the operator or from maintenance to do this. It's simply just key on, it powers up the processor. The processor a lot of times starts powering up remote I/O. It'll start powering up peripheral switches. A lot of times you will have to manually start an air compressor to turn that on. When you're ready for like a hydraulic system, you'll probably have to turn the hydraulic system on at that point as well. So during that startup procedure, it starts looking for all that stuff to come up. Air pressure, sensors, gates, locks on air gates, things like that. And it starts checking the basics of making sure the ride is okay. Once the ride's done starting up and it's checking all of its sensors and it makes sure all of its controllers are good, typically the next thing a ride goes into doing, it goes into arming its e-stops. Now the e-stop you're familiar with is the big red button that's on a lot of the panels around the ride, and that is the emergency stop. It shuts down everything in the event that there's a problem. So anybody can reach over and slap that button, shut the entire ride down cold right where it sits. So one thing it has to do is it has to arm its e-stops. And the reason is because those e-stops typically report back to a big relay or multiple relays that are pulled in. So those relays are out, they're not activated. So when you pull those e-stops out, that thing in the middle, that big relay, is not active. It's not ready to go yet. So the PLC needs to send a signal to that relay to pull it in the first time. And then once it's pulled in, the power from the e-stops keep that guy electrically latched. So it's ready to go in the future. So that is called an e-stop relay. So you have to reset the e-stop relay, or ESR for short. So typically this is a function that's right on the panel. You would typically either have a key switch to do an e-stop reset, or you will have a panel view button, which is simply just, you can make them any size, shape, and color on a panel view, where you have to do like go on the touch screen and physically touch the button that says ESR reset. Once your ESR resets and the emergency stop relays are now active, the e-stops are now active, and you'll start to see everything blinking. All the e-stop lights will now be blinking. During the startup, after the e-stops have been energized, you will see panel lights blinking all over the place. And this is part of the startup feature, because now it says, hey, I'm active, I'm ready to go. First thing it does is it goes into a lamp test. So all the lights on the ride will start blinking. Now, this isn't for every single ride. This is just for some. I have experience with some of these. But for most parts on rides, you can go into some sort of a lamp test. And that is where all those push buttons on the panels, a lot of them are illuminated to where at nighttime you could see them. They light up green, yellow, orange, red, lots of different colors. Well, you need to know that they're working. So you do a lamp test, or the ride does a lamp test for you and starts blinking all of them to say, hey, yes, I'm working. During the e-stop power-up, after the e-stop has been powered up, the e-stops typically flash inverted to what the panels are. So when you go up and see those buttons flashing, all of them will turn on, and then when they turn off, the e-stop light turns on. And when the e-stop light turns off, all the rest of them turn back on. It's to let you know that there are two different functions working there. The programming and stuff behind this is really up to the person that's doing it at the time. So it's not like there's a really uniform thought to all this stuff through every single ride, through every single manufacturer. Even from one ride to the next that the same manufacturer builds might be something completely different. Like if we had an SLC that was built in, let's see, the one I was working on I think was built in 97 or 98. The one built the year after that, say in 99, would be completely different. It would look different, it would be programmed different, everything. This is typical for manufacturers because they're always looking to make the ride better. So they're going to be changing stuff every single time they build one. So we've powered up our peripheral stuff. We have our PLC is powered up. Our lamps have checked. Our e-stop relay has been reset. Our e-stops are now active. So what do we go to now? Now is when we start to go into one of the first two modes. Depending on the ride you're working on and what's happening, it really doesn't matter which mode you go into first a lot of times. So you're going to be locked out of some things. For instance, if you go up to a ride with multiple trains and all the trains are still in the work bay, you can't do anything in automatic mode because you switch the ride into automatic mode and hit start and the ride says, I'm in automatic. And then you go, great, do something. The ride doesn't know what to do. It's got no trains on the track. So it's like, okay, what do we do next? It's like, well, you need to put some trains on the track. All right, how do I do that? You're going to go into transfer mode. Okay, so let's start with transfer mode since a lot of rides have trains that are put away into work bays. They're in the back area, and we do have to get those out. A lot of times, once you're started either in automatic or manual mode, there's not too much difference between those when you're switching to transfer mode. It doesn't really do much. You pretty much take another key switch, turn the other key switch into transfer mode. In transfer mode, it's going to do things. It's going to lock out some of the stuff. It's going to lock out lift functions. It's going to lock out brake functions. Sometimes it'll lock out air gates and other things around there that might interact with the vehicles in the station. Transfer mode is probably one of the most dangerous modes to be in, because when you're in transfer mode, you can typically take one person and move multiple trains around from one location. That's typically wherever the transfer track is. You can do a lot of the stuff from right there on the transfer track where the panel is. So when you do that, say when I go out there to the transfer track and I turn that key switch on and I go out to the transfer and I say, okay, I've got one train, all three trains in the work bay. I start to take my transfer track, I go, let's go to position 1, and I start moving the transfer table over. It moves over to position 1, which we're going to call it bay 1, and then I'm going to go train forward. Well, before I hit train forward, I need to walk into the work bay over there, and I need to make sure that, in fact, there's nothing in or around that train. I need to make sure all the wheels are on. Most inspections, first thing in the morning, we've just gotten done inspecting the trains. So the people pulling the trains out know which ones are ready to go, which ones are not. Hopefully, if a train is not ready to go, but has normally been in service, there's some sort of extra action done to lock the train into the work bay. I know one of the things I did at the park where I was is the track stops that came over the track that allowed the train to come forward. I made a big red plate that locked over the top of the thing. So if we were using, let's say, train number 2, and then for some reason I wanted to take the wheels off of one of the carriers. So one thing I would do is I would go to that front of that track stop over there and I would put that big metal hasp on and lock it with my padlock to make sure that even if someone moved the transfer track over and said, okay, let's go to bay 2 and get that train, that track stop couldn't come off the track. Therefore, the ride would not allow that train to move forward. I've effectively locked the train into the work bay. Other things in there were monitored to where if I turned the key switch off to the electric drive motors, it would actually fault the ride out, so I couldn't do that there. So anyways, when we're moving trains out, we go back in there and we look to make sure that the train's been assembled and it looks fine. There's not air hoses or grease guns or anything draped across the train that can drag out with the train, because once you start moving a 12, 14 ton vehicle, the devices moving it don't care about an air hose or anything else. It will just plow right through it. Does not care. So to prevent damage and other things, you want to make sure nothing's around it, and then more importantly, no people are around it, like there's not another mechanic inside working on the train. So we've done our check. It's like, okay, train forward, we move that out. I move the transfer table back to the run position, and then once it comes back into the run position, this is where it gets dangerous, because right now I can just say I'm going to advance that train into the station. I just push that train forward. Well, in the station, depending on the time of day and everything else, you could have operations starting to get there. We're going to assume it's early in the morning. So you could have operations starting to get there, and they could be running around doing who knows what, sweeping around the station. They could be getting water and drinks for the day and moving them back and forth in there. So there could be people crossing the path of the train. A lot of parks make it a general no-no that when the train is not in the station, you're not supposed to actually walk across the track. But not all parks do that. It's a cool thing sometimes when they do, but sometimes they don't do that. So you have to assume somebody is in the way. Now, a lot of the safeties that are involved in preventing people from being there, like the air gates being closed and stuff like that, they're not being monitored in transfer mode because you're trying to move trains around. So this is the time that you could do something really bad. You could run into somebody, you could tear up something, you could stop a track just out of position, and a lot of the sensors that monitor that stuff aren't necessarily paying attention in transfer mode. So transfer is probably one of the most dangerous modes altogether. So moving trains out, let's get the trains out. They're in the track now. We're going to say one's in the station, one's right behind the station waiting to go. Now we can do things to warm the ride up. Well, how do we warm the ride up? We're going to go into manual mode first. So manual mode, what is manual mode? Manual mode is where we have control over all the individual functions of the ride. So let's start in the station. In manual mode, I can tell the air gates to open or close without a train being there. Because sometimes you don't have a train. But I could tell those gates to open or close. A lot of rides, they won't open or close unless there is a train there. So I can override that in manual mode, and I could tell the gates to open and close. If it's a floorless coaster without a train being there, I could tell the platform to go down, come back up. If it's I'm sorry, I said floorless, I meant inverted. If it's a floorless coaster, I could tell the comb assembly, the robotic flooring, to go down and then come back up. Most every coaster in manual mode with no train being in the station, you can hit the unlock restraints button and then watch the platens, bars, hooks, whatever it is, move to actuate the restraints. Some newer stuff is electronic. They use cylinders, so you don't have really 24-volt action, but I could tell the actuators to come up and make contact with the train, even though the train's not there. If you have booster motors, you could tell the booster motors to go forward. Sometimes you could tell them to go backwards if they have that function to go both ways. Again, station, transfer, that sort of stuff. The booster motors typically go both ways to move trains either forward into or back out of the station. Move around to the lift. In manual mode, you can tell the lift to start up and go to its low speed. You can tell the lift to go to its high speed. So you've got those two functions. You could just sit there and allow that to operate. B&M rides in particular, they like to have booster wheels at the base of the lift, and you could tell them to go ahead and turn on and jog, move the train forward. Pretty much no backwards on those, but you could just tell them to go on forward. Why would you want to do that? For both the lift motor and the booster motors at the base, you would turn them on and run them to listen to them. So you would turn them on and say, hey, let's run at low speed or high speed, and then you would be able to go over to the lift maybe and listen to those motors running. So you've done the morning time checks. You've said there's oil in them. They look good. The filters are good. Everything is fine outside, but you haven't actually turned the motor on to listen to what it's doing yet. So listening in rides is a very big thing. So we use manual mode to actuate a lot of stuff to listen to them. So as we go up the hill, there's not too much we can do. We go with the block brakes. Block brakes, you can manually actuate them, which would be to open all the brakes and then let them close back again. As long as no trains on the track, you could typically override those and say open, close, open, close. Once a train is on the track, or if there is a ghost train in that block where it thinks there's something in that block, a lot of times even in manual mode, that function won't be available. You say, nope, you can't operate that. And one of the reasons it won't let you operate that is because in manual mode, the block system is still kind of active. It's still there. It still works. Some of its safety is gone because you're in manual mode. Some of those rungs and stuff that the ladder logic was looking at is no longer looking at that anymore. So that's where you have to be careful in manual mode because there is a bigger chance of failure than there is, let's say, in automatic mode. So block brakes, you can actuate them, run around the rest of the ride. And the other service safety brakes, you could do the same thing. You'd actuate those, turn them on and off, get them to all open, all close. Some rides use brakes that lift and lower out of the track. I know some of the Intamin rides that use that sort of stuff. You can actually go into manual mode there and actuate individual brakes. Like say out of a run of 15 brakes, you can say, I want brake number 7 to actuate, and raise it up and down. And let's say I want number 3 to actuate, raise it up and down. Or you have the function to say all up, all down. Most manufacturers, when you're in a solidarity brake run like that, a lot of times they just plumb everything together, unless the thing is also designed to trim, in which case, like in a trim section of the brake, I mean, it's designed to stop, but if it's designed to stop to a point and then let it roll through, a lot of times you'll have, let's say, 6 brakes. 1, 2, 3, 4 are wired together so they all act in unison. 5 and 6 will also act in unison with the first, but when 1, 2, 3, 4 open, 5 and 6 can actuate independently in order to slow the train down as it gets too fast to that area. Trim brakes, you can also actuate them when the ride's in manual mode. Typically, a lot of times those brakes are either on or off, or you could pulse them depending on how the ride's set up. Again, lots of variability in this area. No two rides are built the same. And then we're back to the transfer area. When would we use manual mode? Well, typically manual mode is used in the morning time to warm stuff up. Those brakes, a lot of times when you actuate them the first couple of cycles in the morning time, a lot of time the ride faults out because it's got some moisture built up in one of the cylinders or something like that. A lot of times when they actuate early in the morning, you could see a vapor mist come off of them as they work because they're letting go of some of that freshly compressed air on the inside that has a higher moisture content than it will later on in the day. So you have more water running through the system. So you want to, mainly the morning time manual mode is for actuating stuff. Now, it would take 2 people to do that because a lot of the rides, you have to have someone back at the panel actuating the brakes or moving the motors while somebody else maybe needs to go out and look at them or listen to them. So depending on what's going on. So some rides, a lot of rides in the brake sections and the lift sections, pretty much everywhere on the ride where there's something like that, they have a panel. You've probably seen them. It's a panel that sits next to the brakes and it's got a couple of buttons on it. So those things sitting off to the side of the track, those are MOM panels. Not every manufacturer calls them this. I mean, it's just a one-off thing, so take it with a big grain of salt. Momentary operation mode is what those panels are there for. So there's typically, on an average panel there, you typically have 3 buttons on there. You typically have a emergency stop. On a lot of panels, they put an emergency stop on there. You have a ride stop, and then you have your momentary operation button for whatever it may be. So if you're in the brakes, if you turn the ride on in manual mode and then walked out along to wherever you're going, a lot of times that third light is on and it's blinking, it's ready to go. So a lot of times you could walk up to the brakes, let's say, and I could push that MOM button and it will take all those brakes in that area and turn them on. And basically the brakes will open. Depending on how the ride is set up, they might close. Normally open versus normally closed. So you push the button and you could sit there next to them and hear the brakes operate. Okay, so I could sit there and watch the brakes. This is very helpful if you keep getting errors on a particular brake. Well, watching a brake from 400 feet away doesn't do you much good. You pretty much want to be there looking at it. So the first step is you switch it into manual mode and you go out and you play with the MOM button, and you could sit there and actuate the brakes and look at them at the same time and see what's going on. Maybe there's something you could see that's closer than what you can all the way back at the panel. Now, a lot of times, troubleshooting like that, you'll need a second person anyway, because a lot of times you'll get it lowered down to one brake that might be having a problem, and you need to see something. Typically, it's always on the other side of where you are, that you can't be at that MOM panel and the brake at the same time. So you need someone else to operate it either from the MOM panel or from the main operator's panel while you're out there doing more troubleshooting at the time. So the MOMs will run stuff like that. On the lifters, typically, let's see, the one I dealt with, we had 3 panels going up the lift hill. At the base, you could e-stop, ride stop. There was the lift base motor wheels you could turn on and get them to jog. And then there was the lift function at the very bottom, where you could turn the lift on. And then the next step up, it had ride stop, and then jog the lift, and then the top, ride stop, jog the lift. Those are helpful for when you turn the lift on and let it jog and just let that chain cycle. You can hear if it's making any noise. You could be right next to that chain while it's running, and you could just hear if there's problems in the line or anything like that. With a full train on top of it running, especially with people on it, you can't really hear that stuff. So it's nice to be there in the morning time when it's nice and quiet to hear that stuff operate in a smooth, noiseless environment before the rest of the park comes up. Manual mode is also used for resetting faults. Like typically when you have a fault, you can't reset it in automatic. You have to go into manual mode to reset the fault. Faults occur when a piece of equipment doesn't behave the way they thought it should behave. Then it produces a fault. So we'll use one of our brakes, for example. Let's use a slow acting brake, which is very common. It opened up the brakes and then it faults out. And it faults out with a brake error. And you look at the description, basically a lot of the manufacturers try to put in, a lot of the programmers try to put in the words that say this is what the problem is. So on this particular error, it will make it up and will say that it is a error 162, and it said that in the service, brake number 3 did not open as expected. Now, depending on the ride, you may actually have sensors on it that say whether the brake is open or closed by a proximity sensor. Some of the rides don't use sensors on them. They use pressure feedback. The one I worked with for a B&M, it used pressure feedback. So they said, okay, open the brakes. And then it energized the air cylinder to compress the springs to open the brake up. So what happened is a pressure switch was watching, and it would say once it got up to about 70 psi, the switch would turn on, indicating that the brake has opened. So if after a couple of seconds that switch hasn't turned on, that means there wasn't enough air pressure in the cylinder. So you could have a big leak, or in fact the cylinder never got the command to open and the air never went into the cylinder to start with. So they threw out that brake fault that says, hey, brake fault, you need to go check that. It's like, okay, so when you're done, those faults are latched in to the processor's memory. The processor sitting there and says, I got this fault. I'm not supposed to let anything happen until this fault is dealt with. So we come up there in maintenance. We grab our keys and stick them in the panel. We go to manual mode. And then once we're in manual mode, we say, okay, I've acknowledged it. I've looked at the problem. I've adjusted stuff. I've done things. I've maybe made a repair. And I sit there and I hit the reset. By pressing the reset button, you acknowledge that you're trying to get the problem to clear now. Like, okay, I've done something. It's safe to go back to what we were doing. So I press the reset button and get those errors to clear. In a perfect world, you press the reset, the error goes away, back to automatic mode, and you're done. Doesn't work that way all the time. A lot of times it gives you all sorts of other troubles too. It will start conjuring errors from all ends of the earth, and that ride really has a problem with everything. Sometimes the only way to kind of reboot the thing is to switch it all the way off, like power off, and then restart the process again. Not so common. That's a pretty rare thing, but the age-old, like, oh, power it on and turn it off and then turn it back on again. It's like, yeah, that kind of works with rides too, kind of. But processors are really good at holding grudges, so if it has an error and it doesn't like it and it's stuck in the processor, even powering it off a lot of times does not wipe the processor clean. When that ride powers back on, it will have the exact same error sitting in that processor waiting for you to acknowledge it. Manual mode, that's what we use to clear those errors out. So let's talk about when else we would use manual mode. The train has overshot or undershot the station, which means the train has come in and it's gone too far, or it came in and stopped for some reason short of where it was supposed to go. It hasn't homed yet. So a lot of rides use booster wheels to move the train forward and backwards in areas. So a lot of times you can go up there, switch it into manual mode, and tell those booster wheels to turn on and go backwards or forwards to move the train where it's supposed to be. This is a very big process for older rides like old Arrows and stuff like that. They don't care. Inverted coasters, they care a little bit more about that. But the really big ones that really care are rides like a floorless coaster, where it has to assemble a floor in the exact spot. Rides that have very complex loading and unloading stations, where the vehicle has to be in an exact position, those rides care a lot. So those rides typically have in their manual mode the ability to finite control, move a train forward or backward in those load and unload areas, just to get people off of there. We went through startup, transfer, some manual mode. What's next from there? Well, is this where we switch back to automatic? Kind of.
Ludicrous speed! Go!
Kind of. Let's go. There's one step we need to go there. This is typically a maintenance step that's used to turn over between manual and automatic.
They've gone to plaid!
Typically, when I'm there working on a ride, I'm there by myself. I know I've heard lots of people contact me, hey, how many people do you have working on a ride? Because we have crews of 6, 8, 10 people working on this ride. And it's like, oh, I came from a very small park where it was me. I was working on the ride by myself. So where there was no big crew of people there. So one of the things that has to happen is typically when you walk away from a ride and you let it go, it has to be operationally ready to go. So what does that mean? That means it's typically sitting there in automatic mode with the lift running. Now, lift hills are kind of tricky because it requires, a lot of these rides require 2 people to start the lift hill. And the reason for that is safety. They want to make sure that there's no one out of position on the lift hill, that there's nothing in its way, that there's no, like a train perched right at the very top ready to go over, nothing like that. So a lot of manufacturers say you need 2 people to start the lift hill up. That's actually a very common thing. So they put at the base of that lift hill, remember in manual mode, I was talking about the MOM function out there where you can have that extra button to push to jog the lift hill. A lot of times that exact same button in automatic mode allows operations to start the lift up by themselves. So operations can get there and they could simply go up to the panel with no keys in hand, and the person in the panel can just sit there and go, okay, I'm going to press and hold lift start at the panel, and then someone walks out to the lift, and then they press and hold the lift jog function at the MOM panel, and then the lift will start up. No keys necessary. Well, by myself, I don't have the ability to do that. Also, typically, most rides, every time you switch from automatic to manual or manual to automatic, whatever you were doing in those modes doesn't transfer. So, like when I switch from, let's say I have the ride running in full automatic. When I switch to manual mode, it stops the motion on the ride. If trains were running, it stops them. If the lift was running, it stops it. and then I have to go back into my manual functions to either continue to operate those or restart them. So by the same token, if I'm in manual mode and I want to turn the lift on and run it, and I have the lift running and I suddenly reach down and grab that key and go automatic mode, the lift shuts off. Same thing, motion stops on the ride. Every time you switch a mode, it kills all the motion on the ride, pretty much almost every single time. So what they've done, a lot of manufacturers have put in this thing, it's called a maintenance bypass, or it's called a automatic bypass, or something along those lines. And what that allows you to do, it allows one person to do a multiple function. It is typically wrapped up as a maintenance function because it allows me with my one key to go out there, put it in, and do the things that it should take two people to do. Like it should take two people to start the lift. But I put my key in, turn it on, and suddenly I can start the lift by myself. Now that was kind of an older mindset as well. Plenty of ride manufacturers, that wasn't even a thing. Older rides for sure. You didn't need a key or anything. You just hit lift start, that lift goes every single time. The newer safety stuff, they started to be like, okay, we should have two people there doing that, but we're going to cut the maintenance guys a break. We're going to give them a bypass key. So they just need a key and they could do it by themselves. And the newer stuff has gone back to the, nope, we want two people to do it. I'm a maintenance guy. It's like, yeah, we still don't care. We want two people to start that lift up, regardless, because we want to know where everybody is, and we want to make sure the lift, the area, all that stuff is clear. So I'm starting to see a little shift backwards into like more people needed to start a ride up, start a lift up, that sort of stuff. So the maintenance bypass also allows you to do the exact same thing in the station as well. And I'll talk about that here because the next mode is full automatic. Great. What do we need to do in full automatic to run the ride? Full automatic assumes all the startup functions have been done. The ride's been started. There's been the delays in time necessary to make sure there's no train out on the track running. The e-stops have been powered up. The lift has been started and the lift is running. Air compressor is running. The trains are on the track. All that stuff is ready to go. Now you simply just need to operate it. So in operational mode, only a small set of functions on that panel are available to the operator. Not all of them, just some of them. At this point in the video, if you haven't already, please make sure you like and subscribe and give me some comments down there. Let me know if you got any fun stories to add on to these. And then let me know if you want to see something for topics in the future too. I'm always up for new stuff. I've got a list of things that I'm making, but sometimes somebody says something and I'm like, oh yeah, let's do that one real quick. That really sounds like fun. I do enjoy getting that information. You guys come up with a lot of good ideas for videos, so let me know if you got them. You can also email me at ryantheridermechanic@yahoo.com. Let's get back into the video. We're going to start with the basic functions, the gimme functions. Well, yeah, of course that works. We're going to start with the air gates, open and close, entry gates, open and close, exit gates, open and close. We're going to start with the unlock commands for the restraints in the cars, depending on how many cars you have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, depending on what it is. Unlock, lock commands for all that stuff. And then, honestly, a lot of times, that's pretty much it for the operations. That's what they have control over. Gates, unlocking, and then there's dispatching. Can I do it with one person in the station to dispatch a train? No, can't do that. Why? Why can't I dispatch a train with one person? Because you typically have people going in one side of the train and out the other side of the train. So you have two sides where people can be on that. So typically what they want to see, they being manufacturers, safety personnel, people like that, engineers, what they want to see is they want somebody on one side of the train looking down the train, looking all the way down there, making sure it's safe and nobody is next to the train, nobody's trying to get on or off the train, the air gates are closed. They want another person on the opposite side doing the same exact thing. They're looking down the train, making sure, yep, it's safe, nobody's trying to get on or off. That side is the exit. The exit side is closed up, locked, secured. No one's there. It's safe to move this vehicle. Again, like out of the station, they typically don't go that fast, about a jog pace, right? We're going to say 5 miles per hour outside of the station. That's not very fast, but again, you're picking up roughly 14 tons of equipment up to 5 miles per hour. Again, you get in front of it, it's not going to care. It will run you over, tear you in half, completely obliterate your body. Like, it doesn't care. So we want to make sure everybody is seated where they're supposed to be, safe. All their arms, legs, hands, and feet, everything's inside, ready to go. And everyone who's not in that train is back behind a protective barrier to make sure they are safe at the same time as well. So a lot of rides use more complex systems to do that same exact effect, but we also use more operators too. Now, this is one thing, the operational aspect of rides is huge, right? You can have a huge ride with all these technical aspects installed in a park where they could decide to operate it with 2 operators, and that is it. You can have that exact same ride put in an alternate park, and they could run it with 10 operators. Which one do you think is going to go faster? The one with 10 operators, because they have more people. They have the ability to check and close those restraints faster, go in, check, and then get out. Well, if I'm checking restraints and the train comes in and these people get off, the next people get on, and I only have to check 4 restraints, and then I give my thumbs up and we're good, then the train's gone. That's a super fast thing. But if I'm in charge of the entire train and I have to personally check all, 32 restraints, 48 restraints, whatever it might be, and I have to do all that, that loading, unloading process is going to take a long time to do. So there's a finite balance to run there too, because too many operators, and then you have all sorts of people getting in their way. And then you have to account for all of them each time too. They typically don't want operators standing around with nothing to do. So they typically give these operators dispatch buttons to hold. Why? Why would you do such a thing? It's like, because they want to make sure that when that train is moving in and out of the station, that those operators are in a spot where they are supposed to be. And that dispatch button proves that they are in that spot. The one big B&M that I worked with, it had the ability to operate with 5 operators total. And it had panels all around the train that you could turn on and turn off depending on how many operators you were using. And they were dispatch enable buttons. So if you had 3 operators, 3 of those panels were turned on. And then all 3 operators had to push their buttons down all at the same time in order to get that train to go. So, and you could run up to 5. You could run down to 2. I mean, there was all sorts of variations they could have run the ride in. So the automatic mode is more about proving that it's safe to move the train. And then in the bypass mode, going back to maintenance bypass mode, right, we're in automatic. I have my key and I go maintenance bypass. I don't need 2 operators. I can run it by myself now. When the park was closed, I would operate the ride in maintenance bypass all the time because I was there by myself. That's what I was doing. It's like moving trains in and out of the station, checking the restraints on the next train, doing my thing that I needed to do. When the park was open, I did not operate the ride in a maintenance bypass. That was a safety issue, and I always preached that to the people I worked with too, because when the ride platform was active and there were guests waiting in that queue line, I did not go up there and put my bypass key in and say, I'm going to move these trains with people, by the way, by myself. That spells disaster, doesn't it? I mean, there's so many things that can go wrong during that. So what I did is I would always go up with the ride fault. I'd go and switch it to manual mode, acknowledge the error, go back to automatic mode, hit ride start, and then most of the time, I would step away from the panel and tell the ride operators to go ahead and bring the train in to get the ride unloaded. Why? Because they were trained to do that. They were trained to operate that ride with those people on there. They were trained to look to make sure the gates are closed, no one's in the way, everything's clear. I, as a mechanic, was not trained to do that. Now, plenty of people may say, well, I was trained to do that at my park. I was a mechanic. It's like, well and good. Plenty of parks did that. I have no problem with that, right? That's a great thing. I believe that should be done. Place where I was, we didn't do that. So it was like, okay, maintenance honestly did not have the authority to run the ride with people on it. The rare occasions that we did have to do that, and this was one of those things like, for some reason, the train was, we're going to say, stuck in the brakes because it was an error that every time we tried to reset it, it would just air out again and we couldn't get the train forward. Well, I could put it in manual mode and force the brakes open, but I'm taking all the safety away from it. But if that was kind of the option, it's like, yeah, if we just need to move that train forward 30 feet and then we can reset it back in automatic mode and bring those people in the rest of the way, the operational supervisor that was typically at that ride call could make that call with me. And I could say, hey, I'll switch it into manual mode. We can reset that, and then we'll bring that train forward 30 feet, switch it back to automatic, let the ride start back up, and bring it in the rest of the way, and then we can unload the people and then get to work on what the problem is. And they would go, okay, they would think about it. Okay, yeah, let's do that. Okay, so what I would do is I'd switch it into manual mode, and I would talk with the operational supervisor in operations at the same exact time. Say, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to turn this on, I'm going to hit that button, and when I do that, the brakes are going to open, the train's expected to roll forward. Once it's out of that brake segment, I'm going to take my hands off, switch it back to automatic, give it to you guys. Everyone on the same page? Yes. Okay, let's go and do this. If any point in time somebody doesn't like something, all the ride stops are active, all the e-stops are active. So just go ahead and press one and you can knock down whatever I'm doing. Okay, great. Again, communication is key in those scenarios. And then we can go up there and we can fix all that stuff, and we could do that. We could get those modes switched back between. All right. And then get the ride unloaded. That was an awesome thing. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the infamous when you get ghost trains on the track. For those people who don't know what a ghost train is, that's when a proximity sensor, typically, has the wrong information on it. Typically, it means that a sensor has failed, and as the train went by, it either stopped counting as it went by so it didn't see it, or it has failed in such a way where the sensor is flagged and it is just on. When that's the case, when the train leaves that block and the command is given to reset the block doesn't reset because it looks back and says, nope, there's a train sitting there, even though there's not, but the ride thinks that there is. Now, on a track where we had 2 trains on it, now there are 3 trains theoretically on the track. So we need to do something that's called a block reset. The block reset mode on a lot of rides, on a lot of earlier rides, is simply just a key. You put the key in, you turn it, and it goes click and resets the blocks. That's the end of it. Newer rides, I would say after about 2000, it was a very common thing after about 2000, was to say, okay, when you do the block reset, we're going to make you push the e-stop down. You can't do a block reset under normal conditions. So you had to push the e-stop down and drop out that emergency stop relay circuit. And basically it kills everything on the ride. And then once that was killed on the ride, we needed to do the block reset. But we weren't actually going to trust that you did the block reset properly. So what we wanted to do is we wanted 2 people to verify there was nothing there. Let's reset the block brake in the middle of the ride. It's like, okay, shows there's a ghost train in the block brake. And why in the block brake? Because that's where the sensors are. The rest of the track between the top of the lift and the block brake itself, there's no sensors out there. It's just steel, right? But when it's in that brake, it goes into the brake and comes out of the brake. That's where it watches the train actually leave the block and then gives it the command to reset. So that's where your ghost train is going to be. So there'll be something in there, something in the computer system will indicate that there's still a train sitting there, even though there's not. So it's like, all right, let's do a block reset. So you push the e-stop down, and then you typically have to do some sort of a selection, some sort of a mode start, something, even though the ESR is down. The emergency stop relay is down, and the relay is the emergency stop relay is dropped out. You need one person at the main operator panel, and then take another person and you send them out to the block brake. And then once they're in the block brake, you could say, okay, typically you need a radio. A lot of rides have phones installed too, where you just pick the phone up and talk with the person at the panel. Very helpful. You say, okay, we need to reset this block. And typically what it requires is a person at the main operator panel to hold a button or a series of buttons in sequence on that main operator panel while the person, in whatever you're resetting, presses their MOM button out there, the momentary operation button. So it takes typically 3 hands to agree at the same exact time that there's no train there. And then they go click and it resets. Okay, great. If your sensor's broken, as soon as you turn the ride back on, that ghost train comes right back and you're right back to square one again. If it worked fine and you're able to clear the data in the block, then as soon as you restart the ride, that block is free and clear and it's ready to go again. There is a problem with that happened 2015, I think it was. Remember the Smiler? Like we all have that in our memory. That's where the block was reset. Active block information was reset with a train in the block. And that caused a really bad accident, right? It's a really horrible situation that nobody wanted to happen. And that was one of those things. That was the human factor came up. And they said, well, we had this, we had that. They didn't know where this and that was. So a bunch of circumstances lined up. And they basically took a train that had a legitimate block fault where it said, nope, the train never made it out of block. We'll call it block 4. I don't remember what it was. The ride said, nope, train never made it out of block 4. And the people came up and the people got into the machine and said, yes, it did. And they reset the block. And that train just wiped it out at block 4. It's like, okay, whew, no more train there. But when in real life, in fact, the train was still there. And then we had that nasty accident because of it. So nobody wants to see that sort of stuff happen. That's one of the main reasons why, if parks weren't doing it before, when it comes to doing a block reset, no matter how minor it is now, pretty much, they must take the guests off the train every time. That's pretty much after the Smiler incident. It was one of those things like, hey, look, a lot of parks are like, if you're not doing it already, simply just unload that train before you do a block reset. I know it's a pain in the ass. It might take another 15, 20, 30 minutes and tag it on to the overall downtime to do an evacuation of the train. But let's get the people off. No one should be resetting blocks with people on the train. That was the bottom line. That's what we drove away from that. But the block reset is an extremely powerful function that will allow you to wipe trains off the track, even in cases where they shouldn't be wiped off the track. Now, one particular project I worked on before I left, and again, I've been out of the industry now for going on 6 years. One of the projects that I worked on around that time actually was a RMC conversion where I was talking with the engineer, and one of the safeguards that he had developed or thought of to install in that particular ride was when we got one of those scenarios just like that. We said that a train didn't make it back for some reason. That one it didn't have a block brake, so it only had between the top of the lift and the brakes at the end of the ride. So we're going to say, that it took 54 seconds to come back. And then we said at 56 seconds, it was like it started faulting that there was low speed. And then at like a minute 10 seconds, it was basically said, your train valleyed. So one thing it did when the train valleyed, or when the train was thought to valley, is that he actually put a timer in there that essentially locked out the processor for a while and would not allow the machine to operate for I thought it was something like 3 or 4 hours to that. In talking with him, he is like, I think we just did that for an hour. I'm like, I thought we did it for longer than that. He's like, no, I think it was just for an hour. But it was a chunk of time to where even if it was false, you were going to be losing that time no matter what. Because it was one of those things, you didn't want to just accidentally reset the train for something that was actually valid. So we put a timer in there and said, no, you know what? It valid. You can't just suddenly go, no, it didn't, and then reset it and start the ride back up. It's like, no, we put a timer in there to make sure that it wasn't going to start back up again. So block resets, really nasty, kind of necessary to get the information correct. When it comes to rides shutting down, there's typically 3 levels that a lot of rides have. The first level of faults essentially it's not a fault at all, it's a warning. Warnings pop up with information that lets you know that something is going wrong, but it hasn't necessarily prevented you from operating yet. One of those things, let's use the example I just gave about a train being valleyed. As the train was slowing down, let's say over multiple cycles, let's put a hypothetical scenario out there. As it was slowing down, as it started getting slower and slower, the ride started throwing warnings. The warning didn't prevent operation of the ride. The warning just simply said, hey, your train is running slow lap times out there. I suggest you do something about this. Ride operators might get these already on cold mornings when they send the train around. You might get a low speed warning or something like that from the ride that says, hey, that was pretty slow. You might want to reevaluate what you're doing before it valleys. So a warning just gives you information on something that might be going wrong. The next step is a fault level 1, and that is simply that's a basic fault. Those are easy recoveries. Those are simply just a stop motion on the track. Maybe they prevent dispatching, and they say, okay, we've stopped motion because we had some sort of a problem. When we told brake number 5 to open, we didn't get brake number 5 opened. It might be simply just a reset and restart the ride. Might be a quirk fault, and it gets back up and running. It's like, okay, the next level of faults is, pretty much the last level of faults, is like a level 2, which is going to drop out the emergency stop relay. That means there was something super wrong where it not only said stop motion, but it said stop electricity, stop hydraulic power, stop pneumatic power, stop anything and everything from going out to the ride. Okay? One thing that I had on one ride, which was worthwhile, it was simply in the work bay where the train was, the proximity sensor at the front of the ride said that the train was not at the front of the work bay. The train was supposed to be back in the work bay. Well, okay. Maintenance occasionally would be working out there, and we were moving stuff around, let's say doing refurbishment on a train, and we accidentally flagged that front prox right there at the front of the work bay where the train was not supposed to be. So because of that, the ride thought, best logic I can come up with, because of that, the ride thought that it had accidentally somehow turned on its booster motors in that work bay, and it thought that it was for some reason advancing that train forward in the work bay like it was just about to push it out of the end of the work bay right onto the ground. So because of that line of thought, that there's no way in heck that that train is supposed to be on the end of that thing, it actually triggered that second level, that E-stop category fault. So it was not only a fault, hey, there was an erroneous signal on the sensor in the work bay, but it put an E-stop to the entire ride, took down the ESR relay, dropped all power to all the drives everywhere, shut everything down, because the ride was like, I don't know how it did that. If that makes sense. Very necessary on water rides. Pretty much every water ride fault, almost every water ride fault, is that level 2. Because in water rides, you want to prevent motors from leaking electricity into the water, making electrocution. So when you get motor faults and things like that, almost any electrical fault on a water ride, it drops that emergency stop relay out, which opens up all the power to stuff and pretty much kills all the power in the entire ride to prevent electrocution and things like that. Swing rides and stuff like that where they have to keep speed and monitored position between a certain little window. If for some reason the position comes out of that window, again, it doesn't know why, it goes right to that fault level 2. So the warnings, you pretty much rarely see them on rides. The fault level ones that are just like a motion stop and easy to reset, you see those a little bit, not too much. They're typically always at fault level 2. E-stop shuts everything down. Maintenance has to come out and reset it. Why maintenance? Because they're the ones that typically have to deal with whatever problem that was that just happened. So we dropped the ESR out, the emergency stop relay. We dropped that guy out of there, and it's like, okay, what happened? The ride thought there was such a major problem that it dropped out the emergency stop relay. Like, that must be a pretty big problem. Call maintenance out and figure out if the ride is in a position to where it even can be restarted. So the other ones, those fault level ones, you might actually have training in the SOPs and procedures that just say, oh, operations is allowed to do that. When we had the fault level 1, and maybe they're written down somewhere in a procedure, maybe they have different coding to them internally inside the program. Oh yeah, when those fault level 1s happen, when the warnings happen, whatever, our operational crew right there can handle it. They simply just write down the time, where the trains were, who the supervisor was on duty, and just acknowledge that they reset it. Maybe they call up maintenance and say, hey, it just did this fault. We're going to clear it, get back up and running, but just to let you guys know, it's happening. That way when maintenance comes up, they have a log of all the times that it's happened, and they could do some more advanced troubleshooting. But then if it happens at level 2, where it's like, nope, it dropped out the emergency stop relay, oh crap, that's when it's like, nope, we need maintenance to come out now, because we need the bigger keys to be put in the panel to do some fun stuff. Alright, I think that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you like and subscribe, do all that stuff downstairs. It helps me out and I do appreciate that. If you want to contact me, you can always message on the video itself. Just leave a comment down there. I try to read through most all the comments, but things have been pretty hectic recently, so forgive me if I haven't been responding like I normally do. You can also email me at ryantheridermechanic@yahoo.com, and I can try to respond to you on there as well. So that's going to do it for this video. Please remember, the one thing that keeps rides running smooth is when you stay off the air gates. Bye.